can start all over again. Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, I welcome you all today, and I hope that, as we did last week, that we can use some microphones, and hopefully they'll be working so that it's recorded on live stream, because we'll be putting these little forums on our website so that those people who are not here can look at this, or if you want to refresh your memory about something, that you can also do that. So we welcome Pastor Gary LaCroix, who's the Dean of the Calusa Conference, as well as our good friend Deacon Connie Schmucker. Thank you so much, and really appreciate what you're doing with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, what a joy to be here. I've put together a PowerPoint slide, and I think what we'll do is go through the slides, and if there's something you need in the way of clarification along the way, let me know. But I think what we'll do for the sake of time, so that we're still not here at dinner time, we'll hold questions until the end. Does that sound like a good plan? All right. And also, I think many of you probably already know Pastor Gary LaCroix. Pastor Gary, you want to wave? I'm talking about you. He is the Dean of the Conference, and the Dean of the Conference is one who is readily available to you at any time because he's geographically closer. I will be journeying with you. I often say I'm going to be your BFF, and maybe that works today because I've heard that that can also mean best furry friend, but I will be with you. Pastor Gary particularly will be working with the call committee, so he will join us during the question and answer time. Does that sound good? Okay. All right. So let's get started. All right. All right. That's not mine.
That's Rick Armstrong's.
That's not mine. Could we cue up the different one? Thank you. It works, though. They work hand in hand. Glove and glove. As you could tell by some of my message, I work closely with Dr. Armstrong, both in our transition and interim training, as well as transition and ministry in general. So we have some of the same thoughts. This looks like a good sign. I got a thumbs up. Countdown. 10, 9. No pressure, girls. All right, that's mine. I recognize that. All right, so Pastor Walter Still, Succession Retirement Plan, Peace Lutheran Church, Fort Myers, Florida. Transitional, long-term, or succession interim process. I'll read each of these slides because I know that it might be a little small for some of you, but we are at a point where this congregation needed to identify, along with the office of the bishop, which type of transition process we're going to go through. So the first is traditional, and these are just my terms for today, but the traditional is what we might be known throughout the nation as intentional. Whenever we go through an interim process, we are intentional about how we go about the transition process. And a pastor resigns or retires, and that means that in the absence of the pastor, the bishop appoints someone to be the pastor. The traditional long-term, which is again not the correct terminology, but it will work for today, is the same type of process, but it's a situation where the pastor leaving didn't leave under good terms or conditions. There was some catastrophic event in the congregation, and we need to take more time. And often that will look like a 2-year or a 3-year term call. So it says the pastor leaves following conflict or misconduct, interim pastor appointed. And then the next is what we're talking about is succession. Outgoing pastor and council follow traditional transition process with the outgoing pastor remaining in place until the new pastor is called. outgoing pastor does not participate in the work of the call committee. And that's important because, as I said in my message, we are going to do the foundational work. And Pastor Walter has already been assisting getting the house in order, working with the council. But as soon as we form the call committee, he steps back. All right, you have this paper in the packet, correct? All right, I am going to lift out sections. We're not going through the whole thing. We're just going to go through the first few parts. Step 1, current pastor resigns or retires. Check, you've got that letter. A celebration of ministry together, TBD. Well, folks, it wouldn't make much sense to throw a big party and say we love you so much, and then he has to work for a few more months, right? So that's to be determined. Once the next pastor that's going to lead this congregation into the future has been identified, then we'll start to plan the party. And then at that time you go like this, okay? Got it? Step 2, congregation receives a transition pastor or interim pastor. You'll notice in the circle I've got alternate. In this case, we are going to work together going through the process, but we will take every step in the traditional interim process. We will not be skipping anything. Step 3 is a ministry assessment and discernment process. That is in progress. Transition Forum. Rick Armstrong was here last week. Check. Process Forum. I put a check by that, unless you're going to throw me out before we're finished today. I think we're good. Vision, Values, Mission Retreat. Sister Michelle has already come to be with this congregation, but we're going to take it to the next step, the next level. We're going to take all that was gleaned from that first gathering and now move it into what kind of pastor do we need to lead us into the future. We are not the same congregation, as you saw by the slides, that we were many years ago. All right? History reflection. That is on the calendar, October 17th. It's really important to look back at your history. Where have we been? What can we learn from that? So that will be happening. The completed checklist items, I'm going to show the checklist visually. Do they have a copy of that? All right. You have this, and I'm not going to go through it step by step, but these things, and I'm just going to hit on a few of the highlights. These things such as making sure that your congregational records are up to date, that you've talked about your stewardship plan, that you have looked at your mission giving, your giving to the wider church, that you have a plan in the event of a disaster. If you call someone from Minnesota, they may know how to deal with the ice and the snow, right, people? But unless they're snowbirds, may not know what to do in the event of a hurricane. The protocol, who does the pastor or the dean contact to make sure that we in the office of the bishop know how you're doing. Financially, a review of the finances. We always ask that the finances be submitted one more time right before we form the call list, so that we, are looking for pastors in the right category with the right experience and so forth you're seeking. Yes, sir?
It's not in here.
It's not in there. Okay, that's fine. Just know that it's almost completed. There are just a few things still in process. So once that checklist is completed, and we feel that the work that normally the interim pastor would complete is completed, that's when once again, the council and I will talk and say, are we ready? And they say, yes, we're ready. And I say, I think you're ready. Let's form the call committee. Okay, so we're real close, real close. Step 4, the call process begins. The call committee is formed. This is soon, and so you do have the call committee nomination form. Is that correct? Okay. So here's the guidelines for choosing the call committee, and I'll talk about the form that you have in just a moment. So I'm going to take this page, and it's going to be showing up on the screen in little pieces. Am I going too fast? You good? Okay. Wave at me if I'm losing you. All right, guidelines for choosing a call committee. Those responsible for selecting call committee have very important tasks and should prayerfully approach their work seeking God's guidance. This is God's church. So many times we get in our business mindset, and that's appropriate and helpful in making sure that we have all of our I's dotted and our T's crossed. But in the end, this is God's church, and we're going to be tapping into God's wisdom and strength. The Constitution should be reviewed to determine number of persons to serve on the committee, method of election, alternates, and nominating process. So I know the council's already looked at that. We already know how many people should serve on the committee. Typically, there's a couple alternates who will serve up until the interviewing begins. When the interviewing begins, if the alternates are not put into place, then they drop away. That's because you want the same people to interview all candidates. There might be someone on council on the call committee. It could not be an officer. It cannot, and we'll touch on this more later, it cannot be someone that is on staff, a Synod parish deacon, a pastor, another pastor in the congregation, or spouse, those kinds of things. It's never wise to solicit volunteers for a call committee. A careful, thoughtful discernment process should be followed to ensure that the best possible candidates are considered and selected. This goes beyond the people that say, pick me, I'd like to be on it, because what you're doing is tapping into some people who might not normally serve. We always seem to have the same core group of people that do everything, and we are so grateful for them. But what happens is that sometimes some very gifted people remain silent because they think so-and-so can do a better job, or so-and-so has done this before. So open your minds up to everybody in this congregation. General characteristics and expectations of all persons who serve on the call committee include a strong evidence of faith, active in the life of the congregation, positive enthusiastic spirit, faithful steward, and a commitment to follow through. There's a huge commitment in being on the committee. I will meet with the committee as soon as they're formed, and I will recommend that you meet weekly. It's easier to cancel a meeting than to get that many people together. And if you meet at random or once a month, the process can drag out a really long time. So if you meet weekly, even if it's just to cover a couple of points, then you'll keep that process moving. People will show up prepared. You know how it goes. The call committee should represent a diversity of this congregation. New members, long-term members, older and younger members, ethnic, cultural diversity, male, female, different ministry preferences and passions. All right, here's the special notes on the call committee. These should not be considered, which I've already mentioned, employees and staff, rostered person, active or retired, and their spouses or partners. Council member who is not an officer may serve on the committee. All right, the nomination form. This will be shared with you. It is shared with you. And you are encouraged, as I said, not to look at yourself, but to look at others and nominate those that you feel have those characteristics and gifts. The nominated names will then be given to the council, and the council will sort through them to make sure that the appropriate representation is in place. And I was frank. What was I supposed to remember to say here? Do you remember? Yeah, okay. There was something that I was supposed to...
One of the important points is that the people who are nominated must be voting members. And we do have a list, a roster of our voting members that has been included here in this material for the people. I think our sense is that anyone in the congregation, whether they're a voting associate or seasonal, can nominate somebody.
Correct.
But the people who are nominated need to be voting members.
And that brings me, it jogged my memory. I'm supposed to remind you that if you're going to nominate someone, you need to check with them first and see if they are willing to serve in this capacity. It also will raise the question about seasonal members, which I hadn't thought about, but seasonal members certainly can nominate people, but seasonal members cannot vote for the call of a pastor or property. That's a constitutional matter, just to bring that up. All right. I'm not standing right. Can you get that to advance? Nope.
You want the next one, right?
I want the next one. It's just not moving. There it goes. There it is. Okay, the work of the call committee. The call committee will send a survey to the entire congregation, and you will have an opportunity to express what type of pastor you feel that is needed to move into the future. And I'm hoping that those names, the information that you put on that form, will come out of the retreat time you have with Sister Michelle. The one reason we ask that you do that retreat for visioning is that we want the whole congregation, to the best of our ability, to be tracking in the same direction. If, for example, the call committee wants somebody very forward-looking and very open-minded, and they select a candidate, and I'll just tell you, we had this happen, and that was before retreat. They forwarded the name to the council, and the council said, we don't want anybody with an accent. Well, the neighborhood was like 80% Latino. So it's important that everybody try to attend that workshop with Sister Michelle so we all hear each other and use the discernment that's present in the room. At that point, then, you will nominate, and the call committee will also be formed out of that body of people, right? Generate a ministry site profile. The ministry site profile is kind of like your congregation's resume. It's the first look that a candidate will have regarding you. They can go to your website, so it's important to make sure that's nice and pretty, which I've looked and it's beautiful. They will Google you. They'll do all kinds of searching. We had a candidate that just came for an interview, knew the neighborhood to the point that they could say what drugstore was on the corner. They had done the Google aerial view. So they do their homework too. Interview candidates, check references, hear the pastor preach. The pastor will not preach for the whole congregation. They will, the individuals will go to hear the pastor preach, hopefully in their context, so they can see the relational components and how they interact, as well as their total demeanor. Select a primary candidate, or if the names are not right, they'll release them and ask for more. I had a situation just this past week. They had two candidates. They interviewed both. They said, Connie, they were perfect. Both of them were perfect. They matched our profile really well, but there was just something not quite right. We just didn't connect. The first was a little too soft spoken, and they wanted somebody more of an introvert. They wanted somebody more out there. So I said, release. The other one looked really well, performed really well, and he even kept saying, I keep seeing things that pastor would be awesome at. Well, this was kind of a sad situation. He had had an allergy attack right before getting there and gone to the doctor. The doctor offered him eye drops, but unfortunately, the eye drops he didn't take, and so that day he was just not quite on his game, but he was a phenomenal candidate, and they all worked really, really hard. So it was all good. It was all good. Nothing wrong, nothing bad. All right. Yes.
Question about the call committee interviewing and then going to visit other churches to listen to them. It's my understanding that we are not to tell the congregation members of those churches why we're there, because the pastor may or may not have announced yet that they're a candidate for.
Very true. Yes.
Repeat.
Yes. Well, actually, it was more of an observation that when the call committee goes to hear pastors preach that they are not to identify themselves. The reason for that, once the candidates' names are released, it's confidentiality. There's never secrecy. We're not about secrecy. We're not a secret society, but it is about confidentiality. So the call committee cannot share the name of the candidate, where they're from, that they visit, nothing, because it could be, and we're going to get to this in a minute, it could be that they were asked, interviewed, they weren't even thinking about going somewhere, and what if you did not select that candidate and the information got back to their congregation? It'd be very, very detrimental. So we'll come to that in just a second. All right, so where do we get the names? The ELCA database. I can take the top 5 characteristics that you all raise up, and then there's some continuums. It would be nice to have this, and this is a priority. A priority, nice to have. So I can take like 15 different things if I want and put it into the ELCA database, and it'll shake it up and spit out some names. But then, of course, we vet from that point on. Bishop's assistance and personal knowledge. We talk about congregations in transition at our staff meeting, always. And so, Bishop may raise a name, or Pastor Rob Carlson, our DEM assistant to the bishop, may raise a name, or Pastor Hadar El-Yatim, our assistant to the bishop, DEM for the South, might raise up a name. We might actually approach someone who is in a call, as I said, and so Bishop or I will go to them and say, would you consider? And that person might say, well, I don't think I'm finished here yet, but you never know what the Spirit's up to. Or if it's someone, as here it says, referrals from the congregation, names must be given to me, do not contact the pastor. If one of you says, my pastor in Ohio would be great for this congregation, do not go to that pastor. Do not go to that pastor. Give that name to me through, actually, it really should come through the call committee chair. We could, at first, could send it through the council, but even the council doesn't know who the candidates are. So I would prefer the name come to me through the call committee chair if it can wait that long. If you need to give it to me right away, go ahead. It's okay. And in that case, if you raise up a name of a person who does not have a rostered minister profile, their resume, so to speak, then we have to approach the bishop. We do. Approach the bishop and ask for permission to have conversation. Can you crank me up one notch? Thank you. All right, question time. Pastor Gary.
So what questions do you have? And let's use the microphone. Several, Connie has repeated our questions. Okay, Edith?
On average, about how long does it take from this point on to get a new pastor?
That is my favorite question. How long will it take to get a pastor from this point? And as the council knows, that's one question that I don't answer. I can't answer that. It's God's time. I can't even give you an average because every congregation is different. We have some that it's taken years, but there's reasons that it's taken years. We put them in a term cost situation. We've had some that have moved through as quickly as maybe 9 months from beginning to end, but that was not this type of succession plan. So all I can tell you is that if you all, you're in the driver's seat, so if you stay in the driver's seat, don't take too many stops along the way at the rest stop or to get, a Coke or whatever. Stay in the driver's seat and keep moving along. We'll keep that process moving. You are a healthy, strong congregation, and we'll do our best to keep it going. If we bump up against something that we need to pay attention to and talk about more, we will. If you know me at all, I'm pretty forthright and open and honest, and I'll say, we need to talk about this. But we'll keep it moving. I also sometimes get tangled when it comes to finding candidates. I will be honest with you, there are not enough seminarians graduating to fill all the vacancies. The last group, and don't quote me on these numbers, I know it's going to be recorded, but we had 100 and some seminarians available to the whole ELCA, and by the time we got past restrictions or administrative assignments, whatever those categories are, there were like 30 some available. Now, you're not going for a first call candidate, but what that tells you is that there are a lot of pastors retiring and a huge need. Those of us in that baby boomer generation, there are a lot of retirements going on. So the availability of candidate, that's part of the mix. But I will also tell you, as I tell you that news that might not feel like good news, there is good news, because we've never had a congregation that didn't get a pastor. And each and every time we don't find a pastor right off the bat, like I have a list ready to go for you, it's because the one that was called was not available at that time. So again, it's in God's time, and He will provide.
Yes, Carol.
At the time of the initial interview with a pastoral candidate, is it also wise to include the spouse in that interview?
Good question. Should the spouse be present for the initial interview? The first interview is with the candidate only. The spouse can come along on his or her nickel, dime, quarter, but they would just probably hang out in the hotel room or whatever. So the first interview is with the pastor himself, herself. And then when we get to the point where the call committee forwards what we call the primary candidate to the council, the one that the call committee selected has been forwarded to the council. At that time, the spouse will come, and children. The interview will be with just the pastor. However, even at that, the spouse is present, could join for the meet and greet, an informal meal or gathering. When the formal interview takes place, then someone will maybe take the spouse around to get to know the neighborhood a little bit and, just visit. If there's staff at that point, the candidate might meet the staff once they're with the council level, not the initial. Do I have you lost, confused?
It's a question.
One in the back. Oops.
Here, Rich.
You put enough emphasis on the children, because if they're teenage children, they could derail any movement of any family. So the children, especially from teenager on, are very important in that interview.
Yep.
Thank you.
It is important. It's very important for the spouse to come. It's really important, because for those of us that know what it means to take a new call and uproot your family and move them, it's very important that the whole family come when the primary candidate is selected and introduced to the council, and the council says, yes, this is the one we want to forward to the congregation. That's when we have the meet and greet. It's very important. Thank you.
When I met with the Leadership Council, I said that there are a couple of things they need to keep in mind. One is leaders lead, so they're going to be following through on everything that Connie has talked about. And I said you're going to need to do a lot of prayer, because the most important thing that as a that the council can do is select a call committee that is representative of the congregation. You have a strong leadership council. If you have a strong call committee, the process will go forward well. The other thing I would say is, and I know this is more work than Mary probably wants, but Connie's message today needs to be transcribed. Everything that she touched on is something that you as a congregation need to give prayerful consideration to. That was so right on. Frank and I were talking about that before we started the forum. That is so right on. You really need to pay attention to that, because she is drawing on her years of experience, and as a pastor who has gone through the call process several times, listen to what Connie had to say.
I just wanted to touch touch on that too, about prayer. I already talked with the council about this, but now is the time, and it was in the prayer, so I don't need to reemphasize it, but surround this place with prayer. Surround that person that God's calling and preparing with prayer. When the call committee is formed, there's 4 positions, and am I going too long here? We good? There's 4 positions that are not named in the manual, but one is the chaplain for the call committee, and that person makes sure that the call committee and the pastor to come is included in the prayers of the church. They may form a prayer group that meets a few minutes before or after worship, or walks the building, walks the property. It's important to do that. We'll ask somebody that's got computer skills, because there's a whole process. I just touched on things today, a whole process regarding the checklist and the ministry site profile and so forth. Those roles on that call committee, I'm not going to go through all of it now, but those roles are very important in keeping us stable and on track.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask you, because I was a little bit late, did you talk about the fact that you would be meeting with the call committee, you and Pastor Gary, before they actually do their work?
I went right over, I touched on it. As soon as the call committee is formed, they will be commissioned in worship, and I will meet with the call committee that first week, if possible. So I will meet with the call committee. We will talk about the process, and they will be good to go. And the dean will be with us in that first meeting when we go over the process.
Thank you. And I also think I wanted to emphasize that something else we talked about in council that I think is very important is that Pastor Walter will not be involved in choosing the call committee, nor will he be privy to who the candidates are. So,
but he will commission the final group, right?
Right.
And
right.
Install them.
Well, I think it might be good just to review what the Leadership Council set out for the next couple weeks. And you have it again in your packet. You can see that you've been provided with the steps in calling a pastor that Deacon Connie's gone over to, the guidelines for choosing a call committee. And then the next section of it are the voting members of our congregation with both their name and phone number, so that people can call up and say, well, Joe, would you be interested in serving on the call committee? And then you can see on the last page here of this whole material, there is a nomination form. And this has been developed, so you would say, I'd like to nominate blank. The person nominated must be a voting member apiece. The gifts that he or she would bring to the call committee are, and then we ask for you to sign. The council asked for these to be back by October 15th, so that they can work on this themselves on October 21st at their congregation, at the council meeting. All the information will be shared with the congregation. Then on Reformation Sunday, the congregation will be electing the call committee. And then on November All Saints Sunday, Gary LaCroix will actually be commissioning them, because again, I want to be separate from the process, so that's why we brought Gary in. So this is what is here. All this will be emailed to everybody also tomorrow. So you who are here will get this again the second time. But no, that's where we can't pull out people. Mary and Deacon Lisa will be doing an email blast, as well as snail mailing it to those that don't get our emails. So that's the way the council has set this up for us to move forward. For just a moment, Rusty.
It's a question. Is there any reason one can't nominate more than one person for the call committee?
I don't see why. Nominate as many as you want, as long as they say yes.
Okay, good questions.
Any concerns? Good deal.
Connie, I think it's a very exciting process, and I appreciate the gifts that you bring. You've been walking with many congregations, and this will be a time when the congregation will be led with a new shepherd. I'm thankful for hanging here for a while until that person comes, but I'm ready to go to Des Moines, Iowa, and ride my bicycle and play with the granddaughters. So I change diapers, whatever it needs to be. So keep the process moving, Connie.
They're in the driver's seat.
Yeah. Well, Gary, could you close us with prayer today for our group here?
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for this day. It is a reminder of your love for us as we weekly celebrate the gift of the resurrection, that you brought life out of death. We give thanks for the weeks and months ahead for this congregation as they begin to choose the shepherd in a time of transition after 20 years of the ministry of Pastor Walter. Because of the gift of our baptism, we are all a part of your church, and it is our responsibility to be open to your calling us into the future that is yours, and for which, because of the gift of baptism and the Spirit that was received, we will follow the power, the encouragement, the vision that you have for this congregation. Be with them in the days ahead. May they not lose sight of the hope that is ours because of the gift of your Son, in whose name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, go in peace, love and serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God. It's now.